Well, hello everybody and welcome to How to Play Slide Part 2. The first couple of parts we're going to cover the basic principles of slide. In the first part we covered tunings and we touched on strings and slide type. I'm going to go into string, gauge and slide type in a bit more detail now because it's very important. Now there's a holy trinity when it comes to the setup of your guitar with regard to slide, and that is the action, the weight of the strings and also the weight of the slide. Now the reason for this is that the heavier gauge strings you have, generally the better, but the heavier gauge strings, the more force you can apply to the strings and the more weight is needed to do so, and that's the reason why you can use a heavier gauge slide. I know it stands to reason, but it's the reason why if you are deciding just initially to keep the lighter gauge strings on that electric guitar and just learn to play the fundamentals of slide, you should stick with a lighter gauge. Now the action is the next part. The action is the height at which the strings sit above the fingerboard. Now on the whole, most guitars are set up to have a low to medium action. This makes playing a lot easier. However, for slide, there is usually an issue, particularly higher up the neck, or lower down the neck, depending upon your point of view, where the strings are so close to the frets that as soon as you put any force on it that it isn't your finger, i.e. the slide, it will interfere. So you'll get that kind of sound, which is very popular with people just starting out. Now the way you get around this is by raising the action. Now you do this simply on an electric guitar by raising the saddles at the bridge. Now on an acoustic guitar or an electric or electroacoustic guitar, that's a different issue because it means an element of commitment because you're going to have to replace the bridge to raise up the action a little bit. Now it doesn't have to be much. We're not talking about a lap slide setup, we're just talking about a simple compromise setup so that you can still play quite comfortably and also play slide. Now don't make the mistake of adjusting the truss rod in order to increase your action. Now a truss rod, again for those of you that don't know, is a rod that runs the full length of the neck, and it's a metal rod to counteract the force that the strings apply to the neck. Now strictly speaking, when you look down the neck it should either be dead straight or it should have a bit of a bow to it, but only a little bit. If you're unsure as to exactly how to set up a truss rod, go to a luthier. It can be an extremely expensive mistake if you don't know what you're doing, but essentially a small adjustment is just required. It's either an Allen key at the end of the neck here or in there, in the sound hole. So once you've decided to go for a medium or a heavier gauge than you're used to, you've adjusted your action and you've got a kind of slide that feels comfortable, the next decision you have to make is what finger do you put your slide on? Well, there's no wrong answer, really, apart from your thumb obviously. Raikuda sticks it on his pinky, he's a pinky man. I prefer the ring finger. It suits my style, it suits my hand size, and I generally prefer it. Bonnie Raitt sticks it on her middle finger. And there are some slide players, and very good ones, who stick it on their index finger. It's all to do with what you are comfortable with. So if you're just starting out in slide, there's a lot of snobbery about which finger. Oh well, you see, he plays like Raikuda, you can tell. And it's nothing to do with that at all, it's all to do with comfort. So, the final part of this is the way the slide works on the strings. When you're playing slide, essentially your guitar's out of control, so you have to reel in the control as best you can. And the first mistake that a lot of people make is letting the slide just run up and down the strings. Now the problem with doing that is you're hearing two notes for each string. You're hearing the note that's imparted from this side of the slide and the note that's being emitted from this side of the slide. Doesn't sound particularly good. And the way to get around this is simply by resting your fingers over the strings, like that. Now you don't have to press too hard, you just rest the fingers on the strings. This also benefits a couple of other parts of playing slide. The first is that it adds balance to your hand. When you're playing the vibrato, having your fingers there allows balance. And the other most important part is that it prevents any unwanted strings from ringing out accidentally. It happens to the best of us. You're trying to play a nice melody at the top, and if you don't have that, it'll sound... It's that simple. So get used to resting your fingers gently on the strings, enough so that there's pressure to prevent them from ringing out, but not so much pressure that they're actually pushing onto the fretboard. So, to recap, the Holy Trinity. You have string gauge, the weight of your slide, and action. Don't adjust the truss rod to adjust your action. Adjust the truss rod to compensate for action and the weight of the strings. If you need to raise the action on an electric, use the saddles. On an electric acoustic or an acoustic, get a new bridge piece. Again, there's an element of commitment there. And actually playing the slide on the strings themselves, rest the fingers onto the strings. It prevents a lot of unwanted nastiness. So, happy sliding!